Yeah, okay. Hello, greetings to all of you. I am very happy to be at the Bhandarkar Institute once again. The last time I was here was in 2009, if I remember well. That was in connection with the Dr. Meenakshi Memorial Lecture. And the topic was the sense of the past in the Indian mind. Subsequently, the lecture has been published in the Journal of the Asiatic Society, Kolkata. I'm very happy to be here once again, and particularly happy to realize that this is an important occasion. And this is the 97th death anniversary of the revered Rishi-like figure in Indology, that is Sir Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar. We start our presentation with by paying homage to his respected memory. And all of us, of course, are aware of the life career of Professor Bhandarkar. He was born at Malvan in Konkan region, had his primary education in village schools at Malvan, Rajapur. Then his father shifted him to an English school at Ratnagiri, where he was already being exposed to influences of Western civilization and Western mind. And then his father wanted him to go for further education, and he was shifted to the Elphinstone Institute in Mumbai in 1853-54. And Elphinstone Institute had probably, even now, it has two institutions, the college and the school. And Bhandarkar was admitted into the school, and where he completed his matriculation examination, and then went to the institute where he completed his intermediate examination. And he was there from 1854 to 1858. And during his stay in the Elphinstone College, he was, of course, greatly fascinated by mathematics. That probably would have been his specialization, but for some force of circumstances. But he was also introduced to English, history, and even philosophy. So these were the subjects in which he sort of specialized. And he completed his BA examination he completed his intermediate examination by 1858-59. And then thanks to the goodness of the then Director of Public Instruction, Mr. Howard, a great figure in the development of higher education in the Bombay Presidency, he got a Dakshina Fellowship to go to Pune College, now called the Technical College in Pune. And he was here from 1858-59 till 1962. And here he wanted to continue with his fascination for mathematics. But then he was also placed in the company of Sanskrit scholars, and Pune had a galaxy of Sanskrit scholars. And he noticed one difference, that the kind of scholarship which the Europeans already developed in Sanskrit language and literature was a bit different from the scholarship of the local Pandits. And he was fascinated by the sort of scientific approach to the study of Sanskrit learning. And it is here he decided to sort of depart from his fascination from mathematics, and he shifted his interest towards Sanskrit, and in other words, Indology in general. And during this period, he completed his bachelor's degree, and he was already well versed in various components of Sanskrit learning, like Nyaya, grammar, and Vedanta, and in fact, as part of his work as the Dakshina Fellow, he was already sometimes teaching also to the lower level students. And one important thing which we have to notice when we look at his education in Elphinstone College in Bombay, and his higher education in Pune College in Pune, it is here. It is at these two places, he already started developing an independent way of thinking. And there are instances in Elphinstone College where he sort of, cross swords with his own teacher in mathematics, and he had the audacity to tell him that his level of teaching was very poor, and he was not, really conversant with higher mathematics. That was really stunning. See, and also one of his other teachers in history, again at Elphinstone College, one Sidney Owen, exercised some important influence on Bhandarkar's mind. And in one of his lectures, Sidney Owen told Bhandarkar and other students how one of the historians of French history misinterpreted the nature of French Revolution, and that needed a lot of correction. And in other words, Bhandarkar was being told that while dealing with topics in history and related subjects, one had to exercise, independent judgment, and one has to fight for truth. And I think these, the ideas already sort of started accumulating and influencing the mind of Bhandarkar. And then similar things happened in Pune College, now called Deccan College. And as I said, he was not so fascinated by the traditional approach to Sanskrit learning. Rather, he was fascinated by the sort of systematic or scientific approach that was being already adopted by some of the European scholars towards Sanskrit learning. And he felt fascination for the later approach. And that's how he shifted to Sanskrit studies. And of course, these ideas had tremendous, influence on him. And he, his Dakshina Fellowship tenure was over in 1864. And then he had, different kinds of jobs. He was appointed as headmaster of school in Hyderabad in Sindh, present-day Pakistan. And then later on, he was shifted to Ratnagiri as the headmaster of the very school, English school, where he had his, school education in Ratnagiri. And then some jobs in Bombay itself, in Elphinstone College. And then, but the most important thing is, those of us who are closely associated with Pune, whether it is Deccan College or Bori, we should be very happy to realize that for something like 11 years, he was in Pune as a faculty member. He was appointed as professor of Sanskrit at the Deccan College, which Pune College was already shifted to the present place called Deccan College, redesignated as Deccan College. And he was professor of Sanskrit from 1882-3 to 1893. So nearly well over a decade, 11 years. And it was during this tenure, his tenure as professor of Sanskrit. In fact, we would now call him professor of Oriental Studies. He not merely Sanskrit, he not merely taught Sanskrit, but he did indulge himself in so many branches of Indology. See, there is practically no branch which he did not touch. And so virtually he was a professor of Oriental Studies. And it was here, see, I mean, many things happened, which I will come to a little later, see. And then, of course, he, when he retired in 1894, he was given a big farewell. Lord Harris, probably the governor of the presidency, was here. And a big portrait was unveiled, which is now, I think, in the possession of Bhandarkar Institute. And a replica of that is there in Deccan College. And then he was appointed for a brief period of 1 or 2 years as the Vice Chancellor of Bombay University. And of course, he retired from there, but he continued his research pursuits in different branches of Indology till his last breath. That happened on 24th of August 1925, and that happened to be the Rishi Panchami day. This is, in short, his life career. I think there is some point in mentioning these few details about his life career, as we will realize a little later. And then, of course, we know that he was one of the tallest figures in Indological research in India and outside. And, he had so many honors to his credit. And he attended the first Oriental Congress in Vienna in 1884, when he was on the faculty in Deccan College. And also it was here when he was on the faculty, he wrote his famous book, The Early History of Deccan, down to the Mohammedan context, 1883. And also it was during this tenure, he was awarded the doctorate degree from Göttingen University. And then the colonial government honored him with their own recognition, what is called Companion of the Order of Indian Empire. See, probably it means something like he was knighted. That is how, I mean, we know him as Sir Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar. See, and not only that, he was elected as honorary member, fellow of a number of illustrious Oriental societies across the world. Fellow of the Royal Asiatic Society in London itself, and then the Oriental societies in France, Italy, Russia, and of course America, American Oriental Society, which again has a long history. And then, of course, so many other honors came, but probably the most important honors that took place in his life, these were on the occasion of completion of his 80 years of age. And his friends and admirers felt persuaded, thanks to his, monumental contributions to Indological research, that they should establish a research institute in his memory in Pune. That is how Bhandarkar Oriental Research Institute was established in 1917, when he completed 80 years of his age. And then another important event that took place on this occasion was the presentation of a wonderful first shrift, a felicitation volume, which brought together essays, articles on various aspects of Indological research contributed by the luminaries of that time, luminaries in Indological research at that time. You can name Lokmanya Tilak himself, who was sometimes at loggerheads with him for different reasons, but he contributed beautiful articles. And then of course, other Indian scholars like Jagannath Sarkar and Krishnaswamy Iyengar and Sarat Desai and several others. But number of scholars from the Western world, you could name A.B. Keith, you can name MacDonald, you can name Chris Davis and his wife, and French scholars like Sylvain Levy and Jules Bloch and so many others. 40 essays contributed by giants in Indological research. And this volume was already published and presented to him. I think this is a great tribute to the achievements monumental achievements of Sir Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar. And of course, later on, recognition came in different ways. And Professor Paddayya, who was professor of history in Kurukshetra University, published a small but very informative book about Bhandarkar, R.G. Bhandarkar, in 1968. It came as part of the biography series of National Book Trust, that is published by Government of India. And then on the occasion of the 50th death anniversary, the Bhandarkar Institute itself, thanks to the initiative taken by the late Professor R.N. Dandekar, conducted an All India symposium or seminar, and these were published as a book, as a volume called Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar as an Indologist, and very important articles are there in this book. And as far as my knowledge goes, these are the various tributes paid to him. And I don't know, over the last half a century, from 1976 till 2022, whether any other important estimates or sort of reviews of his work have appeared. I'm not very clear, at least as far as my knowledge goes. Probably not much has happened. I don't know. If that is true, if my observation is true, then it is sort of, it is intriguing why this sort of silence over these great achievements of Sir Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar. But I think this is one topic which needs to be looked into, and if some efforts could be made uh, to sort of fill up the gaps, that would be in the fitness of things. Anyway, now I will come to my own topic. I am supposed to uh, uh, give in this presentation some ideas, observations about the relevance of Sir Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar's Indological Thought and Method. And I mean, it is not false modesty, but I feel I am really not the correct person to take up a topic like this, because one has to have, I mean, sort of good familiarity with various branches of learning forming part of Indology. Whereas my specialization is storage priest dealing with stone tools and I mean river gravels and river silts and so on and so forth. But anyway, as a student of Indian culture in general, I sometimes, sort of stray away from my research work in prehistory and then try to sort of take pleasure in just looking at some of the articles or books, I mean, for my personal satisfaction. That is how, I mean, I had a chance to get to know about Bhandarkar's work in 2014. I was invited by the Oriental Institute in Baroda to deliver UP Shah memorial lectures, and I had a chance to sort of take a look at the historiographical aspects of Indological studies in India. And as part of that lecture, I briefly referred to this concept called Madras School of Orientalism, developed by Thomas Troutman of Michigan University, where I mean emphasis is laid on various important contributions, particularly because all the while only Calcutta was being remembered, Asiatic Society there was being remembered, William Jones was being remembered. But here, I mean, the idea came up with the Madras School of Orientalism that, even in the southern tracts of the country, there were some pioneering Indological researches. For example, Mackenzie's famous antiquarian discoveries, and then the recognition of the Dravidian family of languages as distinct from the Indo-Aryan family. And that was in 1816, like this. So I briefly referred to this new school in my lecture at Baroda. While doing so, I posited the idea that whether one could talk about the idea of Western Indian school of Indology or Orientalism. And I just hinted at the idea, and then I referred to, and these two lectures are published in the Journal of that Institute in 2015. My idea was that probably even in Western India, some pioneering developments were taking place both in the 19th century and in the first half of the 20th century, and a little later on. You see, I refer to the critical editions of Mahabharata from Pune itself, from Buri itself, and then the Ramayana critical edition from Baroda itself, from Baroda. And then, and Bharat Ityas Samshodhak Mandal, and then the work of Bharati Vidya Bhavan, this famous series, History and Culture of the Indian People. And then Deccan College itself, particularly the work of Professor Katre, and then this famous dictionary, encyclopedic dictionary, and then of course Dharma Shastra project, again supported by the Bhandarkar Institute, done by the great savant Mahamahopajaya, Panduranga Kali. So that was, and while doing so, I briefly refer to the contributions made by Bhandarkar himself. That was, see, in a very brief, in a very cursory way. I just meant to say that when all these things taken together, probably one could even think of Western India as having pioneered a sort of an independent, school of thought in the Indological studies, its own independent contributions, establishing the identity of Western India, in its own way. See, that was, but then, see, again, as a matter of staying away from my regular studies research, I began to read some of these things pertaining to Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar, and particularly the four collected volumes, comprising the various articles and writings of Professor Bhandarkar, and published by the Bhandarkar Institute between 1927 and 33-34. And so, I mean, that's how I felt really, sort of, it was quite some mind bending, and I felt really enlightened, and I started wondering that Bhandarkar indeed was not only a great Indologist, he, contributed, to various branches, but then some things unique about him struck me, and particularly, his approach to the Indological studies. And I briefly mentioned how he started developing an independent mind when he was in Elphinstone College, and when he was here as Dakshina Fellow in Pune College, Deccan College in Pune, and how, see that fighting for truth, and how, see, an objective bent of mind is important. And so, and I was very happy to come across some of his articles on this very topic. I'll come to that a little later. And in fact, these additional readings about Bhandarkar motivated me to write a small article about his work, and this is published in Journal of the Oriental Institute, Baroda, in 2000, in the volume for 2017-18. See, that's how you see, and it is republished in one of the collected works just published very recently, you see, and I will give you the reference later on. See, this is how, I feel myself justified in talking about Bhandarkar. I would say more as an outsider of regular Indological research. Even Stone Age priest is also part of Indology, but then general concept of Indology is, things pertaining to philosophy, religion, literature, and philology, grammar, and etc., etc. You see, and So this is how, I mean, I sort of readily agreed to, I mean, give this lecture, which in other words is more in the nature of a repetition of the ideas which I put in this article I refer to, published in the Journal of the Oriental Institute in Baroda and republished recently in one of my volumes containing my various essays. So this, I mean, if we have to really measure, if we have to really measure the, I mean, depth of scholarship of Professor Bhandarkar and compare it with the contributions of various workers of contemporary period or before him or after him, I think one could look at this in this way. This is my way of, I mean, sort of measuring the achievements. I would think of Indology, doing Indology at 3 levels. Level 1, of course, you could collect, I mean, Indology is an inductive discipline in a very large sense, like any other empirical disciplines like archaeology or botany. You have to go to the sources, see, and of course, literary sources are there, oral sources, but basically, see, so the, you know, I mean, one aspect is one could excel in collecting materials from various sources. They could be, you know, oral tradition, they could be manuscripts, they could be archaeological sources. You could collect information from the literary texts, various charitas, or even, you know, the various Sanskrit plays, whether it is Abhignana, Shakuntalam, or Malavika, Grimitra, and you can cull information from varied sources. It could be epigraphs, it could be coins, and you know, art history, and you could collect these things in a very systematic way. You could organize them, you could classify them, you could assort them, you could even describe them, and you know, see. And I can easily think of scholars who have spent their entire careers doing this very fundamental job in empirical sciences. It happened even in Indology. Whole life career is, and is an important contribution, no doubt about it. This is one level of doing Indological research. But then, for example, Professor Bhandarkar himself, you know, when he was here in Deccan College as a professor, he went to Rajasthan and neighboring areas and others, and amassed, you know, various, you know, thousands of manuscripts, right? You see, and I mean, there was Bhagavanlal Indraji, I mean, who, see, I mean, collected information about so many aspects of Indology, you know, see, coins and epigraphs and monuments, and you know, see. So this is very important. There is no denying the fact that this is an important stage in the development of, in understanding, you know, our past. And as I said, there have been, and probably there are still, people who spend their entire careers to this kind of work. Very important, no doubt about that. But then there are others who not merely indulge in this kind of collecting, classifying, and you know, describing form of research. They would travel one stage higher, and they would like to compare. They would like to, do compare and contrast studies. They would like to critically analyze the materials. They would like to, put queries to the materials. What exactly are the meanings? And in other words, they would like to interpret these materials, and after these interpretations, they would like to arrive at synthesis. They would like to, sort of, uh, uh, you know, uh, put up, the reviews, uh, synthesizing their work, their uh, the importance of the collected materials and their meanings, and this is, something over and above descriptive stage. This is already a stage of critical analysis and compare and contrast to studies, and finally interpretation, and 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 uh, 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 and then leading to writing, putting out some works of synthesis. I think this is something, and as I notice, it is not that every Indologist has been able to cross the Rubicon and cross from the level 1 and cross the Rubicon and come to this stage 2. There are, of course, some. And then there is the third stage, that is the third level, where a person not only crossed from stage 1 to stage 2, but he is even trying to cross stage 2 and go to a still higher level. What is that level? And it is here, these are of course real geniuses, and they not merely, create works of synthesis arising from their collected, assorted materials, but they would like to look at the importance and meanings of the reconstructions of the past they have made, and would like to relate it to the present. See, this is bringing the past and making it face the present. This is the relevance, understanding the relevance of the past and how it could enlighten the present. And I think this is something, again, very few individuals have been able to rise to this stage. And I think this is my own way of, for a long time I was thinking how to assess and how to rate. But then I thought, sort of is a kind of ready-made model, ready-made approach. I thought of these three stages. Now, if we have to rank a person like Sir Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar, where would you like to slot him? And I'm sure each one of you will have your own ideas. But my, assessment of Professor Bhandarkar's achievements, and these are landmark achievements, is that he rose to the highest level. He rose from level 1, then came to level 2, and from there again he rose to level 3, the highest level. And he did not skip level 2, nor did he skip level 1. But there are some nowadays, in the name of study of India's past, there are lots of people we see around who think they have already risen. They have not passed to stages 1 or 2, but they think they are already in level 3. Now, this is when you are negotiating a staircase, if you, sort of avoid 2 or 3 steps and then try to go to the fourth step and you know where you are. See, I think this is, I think, something very, very important to remember. And my, opinion, and I'm very sort of confirmed in this. My opinion is Sir Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar belongs to this rare category. And if you look at what was happening in Indological research in the 19th century in India, how many persons have risen to this level? There were lots of workers, who collected lots of materials, whether it is inscriptions, coins, or documentation of temples or sculptures, images, and see. And as far as my limited knowledge goes, there are very few. Probably one other person one could think of is Rajendra Lal Mitra of Eastern India, and he was in a way contemporary of, he was older by 10 or 12 years, and particularly I am fascinated by his various articles, which are put together as 2 volumes, Studies in the Indo-Aryan Culture. He was one person who was also trying to sort of not merely gather sources, information from various sources, but then also trying to, reconstruct, the various aspects of the Aryan society. I think, maybe, some of you will be able to come up with other names, but at the moment I am not able to, identify any other figure, with my limited knowledge, I must admit. Yeah. So this is my rating. And Professor Bhandarkar's scholarship, as I intimated earlier, touched almost every branch of Indology. See, whether it is Vedic texts, whether it is the epics, whether it is the Puranas, whether it is philology, whether it is epigraphy, whether it is numismatics, even archaeology, and particularly his essay on the Brahmapuri, antiquarian finds near Kolhapur, in Kolhapur, you see that is. So in a way, he was also an archaeologist in his own way, and he touched practically every branch of Indology he touched, and equally important, this is something unique, I think, in the history of Indological research in India, in particular, and in all his writings, cross-cutting these various branches of Indology, Professor Bhandarkar, was very keen to follow a very critical and a very objective approach. He was not the one who would accept the authority of any source material. He would look at the material in a very critical way and interrogate it and try to, assess the credibility of the source material, and then only, take it for granted. And I think it is this critical approach, which strikes me as something unique. I do not think any other Indologist in the Indian context of the 19th century, could match Professor Bhandarkar. And yes, and what is important is that Bhandarkar developed this critical approach, as an important aspect of, as the most important aspect of his methodology. And, he approached these various branches of Indology with this, tool, what could be called sort of Occam's razor, and I mean, you would use this weapon, and you would scrutinize the materials, I mean, in a very strict way, and this is now what is the how come this approach? See, I mean, what is the background for this? I already hinted at. He already started developing an independent mind when he was in Elphinstone College, and then in Pune, and then the idea that see, truth is the most important objective, and also, I mean, in fact, even our great, I mean, writers of Sanskrit language also, I am told, they also had these, and I read somewhere that in Malavika of Kalidasa says that I mean, you may come across an old poem, or you may come across a new poem, and which is more beautiful, which is more attractive. You should judge in your own way rather than going by the opinion given by another person. Now, what is that? That is, you see, I mean, observing the critical attitude towards the situations, towards events you are confronted with. I think it is here Bhandarkar, I think, not merely, I mean, in fact, he, prepared some writings, he published them on this topic. And this is something which to my knowledge, no person doing even natural sciences, social sciences, humanities in the Indian context in the 19th century said this. In fact, I would say that with these writings of, I will mention these, with these writings of Bhandarkar, research methodology in higher education in India started. Now, what are these writings? And those of us who are associated with Deccan College should feel really, proud that some of these writings, came up from Bhandarkar when he was professor of Oriental Studies at the Deccan College. He gave a lecture in the Literary Society of Free Church College in Bombay, and that essay was published in 1888. 1888. What is that? The title is The Critical, Comparative and Historical Approach to Sanskrit Studies, Philology and Antiquarian Studies. Now here he is referring to the fact that what is called the scientific method, experimental observations, experiments and observational evidence already came up in the West in the 16th, 17th centuries, and particularly meaning the contributions of Copernicus, Kepler, and others. And then these inductive procedures were adopted in the next centuries, 17th, 18th centuries, and further on in the 19th century. And he says that this important tenet called scientific method, which first appeared in the physical sciences, it was adopted, and many of the disciplines, whether the biological sciences, theory of evolution for that matter, whether it is paleontology, whether it is some of the social sciences, whether it is comparative mythology, comparative religion, and all these disciplines benefited enormously from the adoption of this inductive method. We now call it the scientific approach, the spirit of scientific inquiry. You will come across many books on this topic. And he said, this is the desideratum in Indological studies. And this essay was published in 1888. I tried to scan what was happening in higher education in India, in physical sciences, biological sciences, social sciences, humanities. So far, I have not been able to come across any article along these lines, which means that this article of Professor Bhandarkar is the beginning of what we now call research methodology in the whole of higher education in the whole country. I'll be very happy if some of you take this very seriously and do some research. If you come across contrary instances, I will be very happy to learn. So this is, I think, a small challenge I am posing before you. See, so he is Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar is what? He is the Janak of research methodology in the Indian higher education system. He did not stop there. In several of his later writings, at least there are 3 or 4 where he expressed similar ideas. And the last one is in the convocation address which he delivered in Bombay University when he was VC in 1894. There, these ideas are repeated. And what is important is he not merely picked up this important tenet of research methodological tool from his understanding of Western scholarship, but what is important is he used it to the fullest extent in his various researches covering various branches of Indology, whether it is historical scholarship, whether it is his ideas about Vedic scholarship, whether it is the epics, whether it is the Puranas, whether it is the epigraphs, whether it is the numismatics, whether it is the antiquarian studies. And so I think, even a quick glance at his writings in these various branches of Indology will make one realize that here is one person who is a very keen observer, a keen critic, and a keen synthesizer, a keen interpreter, and a keen synthesizer. See, and I think it is here, Bhandarkar truly excelled everybody else in Indological research in the whole country. And in a way, he gave rise to this topic of research methodology in various scientific disciplines. I think this is something very, very unique. And we will, I think, we have to look at our time, and I would like to, sort of briefly highlight his various achievements. And I'm sure many of you are familiar with his achievements. But then this is an occasion to sort of ruminate over these achievements and remember, the great contributions made by Professor Bhandarkar. For example, his historical scholarship, and as I mentioned earlier, when he was on the faculty in the Deccan College, already in 1883, he brought this book, The Early History of the Deccan, down to the Mohammedan context. This is the first, synthesis about the history of the Deccan. And till then, people may have collected information about various aspects of Deccan history, but nobody dared to write a synthesis. And even till today, some of the facts, of course, are dated, new facts are there, but the way he organized this text, I think, is something very, very, very important, and it teaches us a number of things. And of course, his concept of Deccan geography is a little limited. He was thinking of Deccan as the region between the Godavari and Krishna basins, but probably we now have a larger conception of the Deccan geography. But then, otherwise, see, this is a a beautiful synthesis. And, for this purpose, he used all kinds of sources. You see, literary sources, even the coins, even the epigraphs, and even art historical sources. And then what is important is, he says that even before the arrival of the Aryan culture from Upper India, Deccan already had well-organized communities and kingdoms. See, this is something very important, and we now know that indeed Deccan region, has a very, long prehistoric past, long proto-historic past, and then of course historical past. We know, you see, not merely the Satavahanas, but various early historical dynasties and these various kingdoms. You see, so he just in 1883 evidence was very limited, but this statement of Bhandarkar, that even before the arrival of the Aryan elements, Deccan had well-organized communities and kingdoms. He was already sort of presaging what was to come in the next decades and centuries. And then, of course, he also said, like an anthropologist, he said that once the Aryan cultural elements came here, some of the indigenous communities had to retreat into forests and hill tracks. This is how in some of the areas in the Deccan, whether it is Telangana area, Godavari area, or Chhattisgarh area, even Chandrapur area, some of these tribals, have been pushed to the hill tracks and forest tracks. So this is another important observation which he makes. And then in fact, he is the first Indian author who made an attempt to write not merely history of Deccan, but write history of India. And this happened in 1900, and that is some 4 or 5 years before Vincent Smith's early history of India. And of course, 19th century, there were some historians, James Mill and Elphinstone and Meadows Taylor, they wrote. But so this small essay, it is not a book, it is a small essay of some 60-70 pages, a peep into the early history of India. And here, he tells himself that one has to be very guarded in assessing the sources, interpreting the sources. One has to be borrowing, of course, Cardano's terminology, that one has to, be like a judge, not like a lawyer, while verifying the authenticity and interpreting their the source materials. And so this is a small but wonderful attempt at writing Indian history, starting from the Mauryan period up to the Gupta period. And then, of course, Vincent Smith's book came, and in fact, Bhandarkar wrote a 13-page review of Vincent Smith's book. Pointing out there are so many omissions in this narrative. So that is he also initiated writing Indian history. That is, I think, something very, very important. And then his religious history. He, of course, left behind a good account of even India's religious and philosophical thought, and particularly his book, Vaishnavism, Saivism, and Minor Religious Systems. It first came in German, then in English in 1913. And this is the first major Indian synthesis of the country's religious philosophical thought. See, and I mean, starting from the Vedic period, coming right up to the medieval saints, and what is amazing is this work he completed when he was very old in his when see, his eyesight was poor. He had to take the help of readers and writers around him, and that is, you see, and I mean, even till today, this book reads, extremely well, and even for the language, which is used for making these observations. And what is equally important, Professor Bhandarkar, in this work, Vaishnavism, Saivism, minor religious sects, already made this observation that probably, it is some of the core ideas of Upanishadic thought which finally got formed into new religions, Buddhism and Jainism. So he already, made this observation that the roots of these heterodox sects, religions, Buddhism, Jainism, probably lie in the Upanishadic thought. And in fact, this topic, Professor Katre took up for his doctoral research in London University, and then he got his doctorate. Unfortunately, this was not published for a long time, but then I am very happy to tell you that we made some efforts. We could get this thesis, and it has now been printed as a book titled Early Buddhist Ballads and Their Relation to Upanishadic, Early Upanishadic Thought. And it is published by Aryan Books International from Delhi in 2019. So this is, you see, of course, Professor Katre does not refer to the idea that Bhandarkar already, had this, this thought in his mind that the genesis of Buddhism and Jainism probably lies in the Upanishadic thought. Some European scholars were pointing out, but Bhandarkar already did it. And then, of course, Bhandarkar was an anthropologist in his own way. It's very, very important. And we have his various writings about social history, about caste, about and other topics related to caste. And he had his own interpretation about how this caste system came. Of course, he was not the one who would believe that the castes, were created by God. One caste came from the mouth of God, another from shoulders, and another from feet. See, he was not at all, of course, that he. But on the other hand, he gave an interpretation which is very anthropological. This caste system came in a gradual way, thanks to various factors like what we call connubium and long-lasting endogamy, that is marriage relationships within a very limited circle, and then sort of a ban on intergroup dining, and then geographical isolation of the population groups, and the emergence of various trade guilds, and then also the growth of various heterodox religious sects. All these contributed to the formation of the various castes in the Indian society. And this is, I think, this has been also said by some of the later anthropologists. So Bhandarkar again has to be given credit for making this anthropological approach, setting aside the divine origin of the caste system, anthropological approach to the genesis and emergence, evolution of the Indian caste system. And again, his anthropological insights come into the picture in his other article, that is, the incorporation of non-indigenous groups into the Indian social system. And right from the dawn of history, we had the several groups, coming from outside, particularly from the northwest, the Kushanas, the Huns, the Gujars. And he's telling us in this that in the course of time, these groups which came from outside, they slowly got, sort of, Indianized, and they started incorporating some of the indigenous practices, whether they're religious or cultural or social, and they became a part of the Indian society. But then after the Muslim entry of the Muslim groups, I think things happened differently, and that is a different topic. See, so that sort of amalgamation into the Indian society has not taken place, and as we know, lots of problems arise because of that particular factor. But then this was not so with the other incoming groups. I think here again we have to, salute the anthropological insights of Professor Bhandarkar. And then philology and Sanskrit, literature. And I am not the right person to go into details. But then, particularly his Wilson philological lectures, I think these are 7 in number, which he delivered in 1800 and 1876, published in 1877. I think this again, I'm not an expert in this, but then I'm amazed by his, wide sweep of scholarship. See, these are 7 lectures which are there in the book form now. See, I am immediately reminded of what Sir William Jones did in his 3rd anniversary discourse in the Asiatic Society in Calcutta. And there he said, that famous, sentence of his: Sanskrit is of wonderful structure, more copious than Latin, more perfect than Greek, more copious than Latin, and more, more grammatically refined than either. And then what has happened? See, that, gave rise to this concept of Indo-European family of languages. And in these 7 Wilson philological lectures, which Bhandarkar delivered in Bombay University in 1876, he is doing the same thing for the Indo-Aryan family of languages. And he is telling us how Sanskrit and its variants, Pali and Prakrit, over a period of, 2000 years or so, how they gave rise to so many indigenous Indian languages of northern India, including Marathi in the Deccan region. See, so this is, I think, I'm not the expert to go into this, but I think this is again a wonderful presentation about the development of Indo-Aryan group of languages from the original roots, that is Sanskrit. I think this is, and then of course, see, as I said earlier, Bhandarkar was looking at everything connected with Indology with very, critical eyes. And his critical eyes, I mean, even these literary writings, did not escape the attention of his critical eyes. For example, when he's talking about the various charitas, Harsha Charita, etc., etc., he's, pointing out a poet like Kalana, Rajatarangani, author of Rajatarangani, how, we have to be very careful. And he's telling us, to believe that some of the Kashmiri princes ruled for 300 years. And also Kalana's, writings mean that the Kushanas, go back to the 30th century before Christ, like this, and then also he's finding fault with observations made about contemporary of Kalidasa and Bhavabhuti and contemporary of Panini and Katyayana, and equating, Sita with the Herod of Troy and so many things. I think this is that. So I'm not going to details and this, and of course, finally, his role as a social and religious reformer. See, very briefly, we looked at his contributions with a critical eye to the Indological scholarship in the strict sense. But then, as I mentioned earlier, he was the one who used his knowledge of Indology not merely to reconstruct the past, but then he tried to say, whether we can understand some things from the past, take some things from the past, and use these, for understanding and assessing the present. And it is here he found, evidences of different kinds, both as regards religious history, both as regards society, both and also regarding religion. And he would now like to use, his observations to say that we need to, give up some age-old ideas about our past and then reform our society and even our religious beliefs. And this is where you see, his observations about caste, see that, and of course, he was against the idea of revolutionary changes, in the eradication of caste system. Gandhiji also was telling, along these lines, whereas probably others like Dr. Babasaheb and Ambedkar wanted to follow a more, a quicker approach, see, that is. And then, of course, we know that Bhandarkar argued very using his Indological researches. He argued against, he argued in favor of widow remarriage and against child marriage, and probably sometimes coming into conflict with other leaders and scholars like Lokmanya Tilak, and probably some of you are familiar that in one of the lectures which Bhandarkar was going to make in Pune, that some of the people did not like his ideas that age of consummation of marriage, it should be some years after puberty, and they did not agree with him, and his meeting was stoned. And anyway, that is, so he did not sort of, sort of give up these ideas because of the threats. On the other hand, he went ahead with the ideas. And likewise, religious reforms. And this again, very important, he became a member of the Pradhana Samaj. See, Bhandarkar was not against religious spirit. He was, he very much pleaded for the sense of religion, usefulness of religion in society. But then his idea of religion was different, and borrowing, ideas from Upanishads, and other early Indian writings, he looked at the the concept of God in a very different way. That God is sort of supreme force present everywhere, and not necessarily in anthropological shapes and forms, and he was not in favor of worshipping so many types of gods and goddesses, and all these, I think, all these he gave a number of discourses in Marathi, particularly probably something like 60 or 70, and these are all collected in that volume. I could read some of these with my limited knowledge of Marathi. Dharma par Lek Vyakhyana. See, this is, I think, something, So he contributed, in his own way to the reformation of the society, whether it is the social practices or religious practices or cultural practices. I think this is, something very, very important. And also, I must say that, he was also pleading that, we should give up. If you read his convocation address of Bombay University, 1894, and writings, or even this article, Critical Comparative Historical Approach, is telling that some of us have a tendency to glorify our past, that we had so many things, we achieved this, we did everything, and, this kind of approach to the past is not correct. We should look at it, in a critical way, and compare it with other cultures, and then see where we stand. See what are our deficiencies and what are our shortcomings, and accept these in a genuine way, these shortcomings, and try to overcome them. And it is here he was advocating in one of his articles that we must use this critical comparative historical approach and relook at our past, our various aspects of Indology, society, religion, social, cultural, practices, etc., etc. Our own historical past, the way we were looking at it, and then come up with we will see, if we use this critical approach, we will be able to come up with the understanding of our past, which can be even better than the understanding of the past done by the foreign scholars, the European and American scholars. And this is, I think, a big challenge, before all of us. And this in short, and Bhandarkar's, there is another thing which I would like to emphasize. I would like to draw your attention to, if some of you have not been able to see this. Professor Bhandarkar was here in Deccan College till 1893, and 1893 happened to be the silver jubilee of Deccan College. Deccan College was shifted to this present campus near Aroda in 1864, and 1868 building construction was over, and Pune College was in fact shifted to Deccan College. So from 1868 till 1893, 25 years. So there was a celebration of this silver jubilee. On this occasion, Bhandarkar was, requested to give an address, and this address is also printed as part of the collected works. The aims and ends of college education. I think this piece of essay is something again, of absorbing interest and importance, to all of us today. And what he is telling us, and true to his, scholarship in Indology, he is telling us that what after all education means? Education means to lead. See, I mean, it leads you to higher things. And he borrowed, used this concept of Indian concepts of Vinaya and Samskara. These are the two concepts which really, allow, the teachers to train the feelings and faculties of their wards and form their character, and see, and then also education, I think, see, in other words, that see, there are some values inculcated in the minds of the students, and Indian thought and Indian philosophy, in fact, has a number of these values. So he was already hinting at the importance of Indian values in the higher education system, and in fact, in the operation of the whole society. And then the other important task of education, he says here, is that whether you are doing artificial intelligence or computer science or biology or whatever, archaeology or Indology or whatever, ultimately education should be that which will make the students to make correct observations, make good comparisons. That is the principle of compare and contrast and criticism, and then finally drawing correct inferences. Now, see, if you look at these observations and their meaning in a larger way, you will see that these are applicable not merely in academic research, whether it is in Indology or physics, or these are actually applicable everywhere in the life. See, even in day-to-day life, that, see, what are your observations? Sometimes we look at people or things and then immediately form impressions, oh, somebody is bad or somebody is, but see, you have to be very, very careful in making your observations, and you have to be scrutinize things and accept those which are, and not, make ready-made inferences. And then finally, your interpretations. In fact, these precepts, good observation, good analysis, good, critical approach, and finally arriving at the correct inference. I think these tenets of thought are applicable everywhere where there is human life, not merely where academic research goes on, but everywhere, whether it is, the daily wage workers, whether it is the farmers, whether it is, jamindars or industries, everywhere, you see. And society automatically will tend to be more orderly and more disciplined. And if these are avoided, then all kinds of problems, see, right? I think this is again a beautiful insight which he has given to us. And so I will now conclude. I would say that Bhandarkar's legacy is indeed immense, and it was continued by his predecessors, whether it is at Deccan College, whether it is at Bhandarkar Institute, and these various projects I mentioned, Dharmasastra project, critical edition of Mahabharata, critical edition of Ramayana, and encyclopedic dictionary, and of course, Professor Katre, in fact, his first book, Introduction to Indian Textual Criticism, is nothing but an exemplification of this critical comparative historical approach. And what Iravati Karve did with Yugant, see, that's analysis of the characters, and what my Guruji Professor Sankalia did with Ramayana, and in fact, Bhandarkar also was very, very careful in looking at the epics and the Puranas as true historical documents. He did not deny completely their historical usefulness, but he said we have to be extremely careful, and this is easy. So later on, and then of course, I think it is here Bhandarkar has, not very left, no longer with us, but then he has left rich legacy from which we could learn and benefit even now and even in future. And I think, he has brought a great amount of wisdom to the world of, not merely a great amount of new learning, but brought a great amount of wisdom to the whole world of Indological scholarship. And I think he may have died 97 years ago, but his thoughts, his legacy are still alive, and they will continue to guide us in the decades to come. Here, I would like to conclude with one or two small requests, if these really carry any meaning, to the authorities of Deccan College and Bhandarkar Institute. Collected works of Bhandarkar, 4 volumes, these were published long ago. I think it is worth reprinting them, and they should be available freely to the scholarly world. See, this is something which the Bhandarkar authorities, the Bhandarkar Institute may keep in mind. And I would also say that, also his 3 or 4 articles about the importance of the critical approach, they could be brought together as a booklet, and that should be published separately so that it can be used as a reference, writing in all courses in Indian universities dealing with research methodology. This is, I think, again, Bhandarkar Institute is capable of doing it. And one more request, Bhandarkar's legacy is still alive and full of new ideas. If one understands him correctly, one gets fresher and fresher ideas, which means that he's still alive. His thoughts are still alive. His methodological approaches are still alive. And Bhandarkar Institute conducted the seminar 50 years ago, 1975, death anniversary, 50th death anniversary. But before the centenary of his death comes in 2025, I would think that the Bhandarkar Institute, in alignment with the Deccan College and other institutions, could think of organizing an international seminar on the relevance of Bhandarkar's Indological research and his method. And that seminar should be thrown open to scholars everywhere, not merely in Pune and Deccan College, Bhandarkar and India, but it should be open to everybody, connect with Indological research, and let them assess his achievements, and let them also assess the relevance of his achievements to Indological research now, and to the society in general at the global level. These are my humble, prayerful requests to the authorities of Bhandarkar Research Institute. With these remarks, I would like to pay my respectful homage to the memory of Sir Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar once again. And I would like to thank the Bhandarkar Institute once again for giving me this opportunity of making a few layman's observations about this great savant, Sir Ramkrishna Gopal Bhandarkar. Thank you.